All right, everybody, we are back again. Season number 2 of the Coach's Compass. Again, don't know what episode it is because we just continue to roll, continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world. It's your boy, Coach Coop, reporting live from the USFA. Again, Coach Jay can't be with us today because he's hungry. Time difference, still trying to figure that all out. He's dealing with retirement, trying to figure out what he's doing next, whatever it may be. Now, just remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below. And remember, turn on your alerts so you know when we drop an episode every single week. Again, we got another cool guest with us today. We got Coach Brader. He's a strength and conditioning coach, motivational speaker, entrepreneur, and investor out of the University of Miami Sports Science. Coach, thank you and welcome to the Coach's Compass.
What's happening, man? It's great to be here. Great to finally touch base and talk some shop.
Yeah, man, we've been going back and forth for a little bit trying to figure this thing out. But, Coach, that's a lot of hats that you're wearing, man. Motivational speaker, entrepreneur, investor, sports science. Like, what got you to wear all those hats, and how is it to balance all those things?
Well, I think that's a misnomer whenever you hear balance, right? Because in sports and life, there's always that state trying to get back to equilibrium, right? So kind of if you're off balance, the next step is to stand up and keep moving. So I basically come from a different background. So growing up, I lost my mom and dad to cancer within 10 months. I was homeless and, just came from a tough place. And a lot of folks, they bet against me. My family wasn't very, educated. So a lot of folks counted me out, but I always knew that I was a hard worker. I had some goals and dreams and that stuff. And I think that's why I'm always moving, man. I'm always trying to set new goals and achieve new things. And I think that's kind of where that started.
Yeah, I mean, you get a hunger like that from people always doubt. And that's when you talk to like any really high achieving, even athletes that have been doubted and been told they can't do something, right? There's always that extra edge that gives them that push to get to where they're at. But I want to say first off, sorry about you losing your parents, because I also lost my dad to cancer too, but that was about 12 years ago. And I know how much that hurts, right? To lose those figures in your life. What was it like, bouncing back from that and kind of, like you said, you had a rough like family that wasn't super educated, weren't always together, but like, how'd you push through?
Yeah, so my mom and dad were both diagnosed with cancer when I was in ninth grade, and I've got a twin, Eric. So it was Eric and I, and we basically didn't have the standard upbringing. I played sports. I played football, ran track and field, and was always involved with sports. And I knew from an early age that I wanted to eventually go to college. So my family was there for me early. My mother was really very supportive and would always tell me like, "Hey, look, Jay, it doesn't matter where you're at, it's where you're going." She was always there, and when she got sick and my father had gotten sick, I kind of just knew that, I probably didn't have much time with them, so I really needed to lock in. So fortunately, I had a lot of support from coaches and friends and that stuff. And when my parents passed on, I just had a lot of people that were there that saw my talent and were able to kind of help me sharpen it up. So I was able to move on, eventually go to college and become an All-American and just kind of build a gym and did all types of crazy stuff.
Just a little subtle flex right there. All American, built my own gym, get it up. But I know we've been talking a lot, like in the DMs, about investments, right? And I think this is a huge part for a lot of the young strength coaches, even older strength coaches, and people getting into this field that have no clue what it means to get into investing. We're talking stocks, we're talking bonds, we're talking all these different types of things. And I feel like you have a lot of knowledge in that sector that can be shared with some of us on, even because I just learned about Roth IRAs and crypto and all this stuff to get involved in. I think that's a huge part that we are missing on.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is when I started out, I think having a humble background, coming from not a lot of means. I basically learned early that if you want to do anything, you have to start off by investing in yourself. And that comes down to just education. And being a strength coach, I think that you know firsthand that you're investing, you're pouring everything you got into every athlete. You're teaching them to pour everything that they have, out of themselves into whatever they're doing. So I think when I started coaching, I basically started out teaching, coaching, running some camps and that stuff. And I invested in just gaining knowledge in whatever I was doing at that time. And when I was teaching, I basically used my salary as my foundation. All right. And when I would coach and do anything on the side, I would reinvest that into my training. So whether that was buying equipment, it could have been just, taking courses, whatever it was. I was always taking the extra and using it to gain something else. And when I taught, I started out with a 403B. All right. So I know a lot of people have a 401k. If you teach, you have to get a 403B. So I maxed that out. I was at that time I was 25, and I could put up to, I think, 16,000 a year into that. Back then, this was back in 2001. I think I was making like 38,000 to start. Now that's not that much. Back then, it seemed to be pretty darn good. So I was doing some training camps on the side, and I lived just a modest lifestyle, like bare bones. And I maxed out my B. And if I wanted spending cash, I would basically just do extra training camps. I would personally train folks, and I would, use that cash to basically live, but I would reinvest that into my training. And the one thing that I learned to use was credit. And I know a lot of guys are looking to build their credit scores and that. So when I started my gym, I started out in my house, and I purchased just enough that I could train maybe 3 to 4 guys at one time. And I would take a 0% credit card, and I would have that for maybe 1 year. And whenever I bought, I would factor in paying that off in that time frame. So if I owed $3,000, I would set aside $250 every month, and I would pay that down. Then if I wanted to expand, right, so I got a larger space and that stuff, I could flip these credit cards and always get something with a very low rate. All right. So that helped me save as far as paying interest rates and that stuff, because I know when people start out, they like to incur a lot of debt. And I personally, I hate to carry debt. I know there's some folks out there that'll say that's fine, but you know what? I'm never going to spend what I can't make. Now, when I was doing my 403B, I basically would look for some stock trends, and I would, buy some stock. So when I was doing my training, I would take some extra cash here. Maybe it's 1,000 a month, and I would look for some good trends, some hot stocks, and I would purchase, say, $1,000 every month. So I would buy the highs, I would buy the lows, and I would let those sit there. Fortunately, I bought Bitcoin, it's GBTC, okay, not the actual Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin ETF, and that took off. I think you really got to be savvy with that, but you really got to live your lifestyle, I think, modestly early. And then as you start to generate like wealth and that stuff, you can still have a good time, but just always be like, always prep for those downturns. So, like, I think coming from not having a lot, I kind I kind of know how to live on bare bones. So, like, say for example, when I started to make some really good cash, I would always live like I'm making maybe 50,000 a year, even if I'm making 100. So I would always think like, okay, like, what do I need in case something catastrophic happens? And I think from having my parents pass away, I kind of always have that in the back of my mind to plan for that, like just bad stretch.
But I mean, that's kind of hard to learn about, like the 403B. Like that's the first time I've heard about that. And they were talking about stocks and like where to invest your money at. Like, who taught you this stuff, and what were you looking at to kind of continue to expand on it?
Know what, man? I'm just interested in a lot of things. So I love to read. Uh, I know that when I was younger, I read this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Mm-hmm.
That basically talks more about investments in real estate and that stuff. But I always was into stocks, and I also gambled, right? So Jack, and I've written a book about it. So I had some dark days, but basically I always liked the aspect of like that gamble. So I would look at the stocks. I would see what's like happening now with the election and that stuff. The market's been way, way up, and then that tends to happen after the election. But I look for trends, like what candidates are pushing what agendas. And then from there, I would look at the trends, like what companies look pretty good. Who's supposed to grow, and then from there, you're always trying to buy low and sell high. I mean, that's kind of common sense there with that as far as buying and selling stocks. But I would just say, hey, have a pool of cash you have, and say, I'm going to have $500 that I have it. It doesn't really matter if I lose it. And I'm just going to take a shot here in a few stocks and kind of just watch how each goes, and then from there have maybe a plan that every month you're always going to invest a certain amount into maybe a specific stock, or maybe you have a pool of 5 to 10 stocks you like.
For sure. On top of that, you talked a little bit about investing in yourself and investing in coaching and your training. What was it like to kind of go from like having people in your garage training to then expanding to get larger locations, and now you're at University of Miami and you're still teaching yourself too?
Yeah, so here's what I do. All right, so I started out in my house. So I was coaching. I taught psychology and sports psychology, and I was coaching at my school. And I had about 18 state track and field champions within like a 5 year stretch. So I was doing really well. And when the fire's hot, you have to attack. So I had a lot of people calling me. They're like, "Hey, look, would you train my child?" So I just bought my house. I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So then I knew exactly what I needed to buy. So I would just buy a very small scale. And then I would train the folks, I would pay off the equipment, and then I would always gradually buy more and more things. And then I moved into a smaller space that was outside of my house. And eventually that grew into over, it was a 5,500 square foot space. So back in 2018, my wife and I were talking, and I just had quit drinking for almost a year because I was doing a lot of crazy stuff. So I had been sober for 1 year, and we talked about me potentially getting into college and trying my hand at that. She's like, "Look, Jay, it's a great time to go try it." So I reached out to 100 schools, and I got contacted by Florida Atlantic, and then I had gotten contacted by Bama, and then I was about to go to Florida Atlantic, and then Bama called me. I'm like, "No, what? I can't skip out on that." And then I plan to go there for maybe 2 months. And my guys were going to operate my gym, and 2 months turned into 8 months, and 8 months turned into me getting hired at La Tech. And then I was there for 5 months. Then I got hired at Albright College that's back home. And so it was nuts. So I was managing my gym from down south, and I had a green screen in the background, and I was, talking all this hype and talking trash and getting people signed up for camps and training. And everybody thought that I was still at home. And then my staff, I would set it up where my staff would take care of all the sales and the deals and that stuff. So my goal was to sell my gym June 1st of 2019, and that would have been my 43rd birthday. Yeah. So I had a 5 day stretch home, and I was able to sell my gym on June 1st. I handed over my keys. I got my check, and then I'm like, I'm going into college, right? So it worked out well, but you always have to have a growth mindset. And every year I try to do something that's a challenge. So this year my son started playing football again, and I went down to see some friends at the U, and I ran into Coach Feld, and Coach Feld coached at Bama, and he's a legendary strength coach. Coach Feld with his stash.
Yeah.
He's a phenomenal guy. And I had mentioned that I was getting into sports science, and I passed the sports science test and that stuff. And he and I just kind of were, we just like hit it off like old friends. So he introduced me to Eric, who's in charge of the sports science there at the U. And they're like, "Look, we'll call you back, and then we'll see if there's a spot for you." So since I teach, I'm free from June until the start of the school year, and it worked out that I was able to go down there, help them out for a few months, and learn a lot, and kind of have a side gig. So it was awesome. But the goal is always to grow, and I think that if anybody has a dream, you can't sit back and just wait for things to happen. It's never too late to start, and you're never too young to kind of put in your roots and that stuff. So I know that there's always people that will doubt you. They'll say, you're too old, or you waited too long. It's nah, don't think about that stuff. Just worry about what you can do right now to move you closer to that goal. So my ultimate goal though is to get out there and coach full time. But right now, enjoying being here back home, family and kids, and teaching and that stuff, and coaching a bit too.
Yeah, I mean it's always good to be back home close to family. With you owning your own place, right? And then going into the college sector, what was it like to kind of, I would say, lose a little bit of control, right? Because at your own place, like you have control over everything, and then now you're kind of like working hand in hand with the head coach and underneath some kind of supervision. Was there also any time in there that you felt like a little bit of imposter syndrome? Like, am I in the right place that I need to be at, or what?
Yeah, so I think the first time that I really felt that was when I went to Bama. Now, I'm sure you know or have heard of Coach Cochran.
Yep.
Cochran's a man, right? And so this was right after they won the chip, and
Oh,
I mean, I was through the gauntlet. Like I was drinking and gambling, and like back in 2009. I lost my teaching job because they had cut my job out, and I went full steam into my gym. Right, so I was hammering, and I always had this feeling of just loss. Like I lost my family, and I just had a hard time dealing with that. And I would drink sometimes, and if my gym was doing really well, I would have a few drinks, and I would really turn up for the wins. Got to a point where I would want to drink and go gamble, play some blackjack and that stuff, and I was living like a destructive lifestyle. So when I went down to Bama, I had been sober for 1 year, and I felt great. And my first day, I see the national championship coming in to work out, and I see Tua and Hurts and all these studs,
big dudes.
and I'm pinching myself. When you go into these places, I mean, it's impressive. And I don't know if I'm old school or not, but I'm never really starstruck, but I was really like just starstruck from the environment standpoint, thinking about all the all-time greats that have passed through there. And you're looking at Bear Bryant, and then you go into Bryant Denny Stadium. You're thinking, man, like this is the tip of the spear. And then you're watching Nick Saban like getting on athletes and coaching
Yeah.
them hard. And I'm like, dude, if my friends knew I was here right now, and it didn't matter what role. At times guys like, oh, well, you're only this, or you're not that. It's like, well, I'm here and you're the observer. So you're nothing, right? So it's like, who the hell are you to talk to me about, my role? So I personally just like was just in awe. But in a very short time, Coach Cochran saw my talent, and then like within in a week, he's like, "Hey, I want you to run this one drill." It was called Hunker Punch, right? It was this bag drill, and I'm thinking like, it's not really like a super big deal, but I'm just some guy that was like partying like out of his mind and like about to drive off a cliff really. Like I'm like, man, my life was really in like a tailspin. And after a year of just like focusing on myself and my all the things that are important, my family, and just like improvement and growth, I'm here with all these greats. And at first it was very hard knowing that I kind of wasted a lot of years, right? So from '09 to '07 or to 2017, like that was kind of like a blur. And I wasn't really grateful for all the positive things that I had in my life. I got a great wife. My children are awesome. I have three great kids. And, I was really blessed because I was able to overcome so many negative things and really build a positive life. But I never was happy with me. Right. And it was almost like I just was beating myself up and I didn't know why. So when I went down to Bama, I just took a shot and was like, I'll come down for no fee. I'll just work free for 2 months. And then they're like, hey, look, Jay, you're doing a really good job here. Would you stay? And I'm like, my wife and I talk, and then she's like, listen, man, I will hold it down here. We're proud. We're so proud of you. Where most wives and that stuff would be like, hey, look, man, you have to come back home. Like she was like, look, Jay, you have to stay. The kids think it's awesome, right? Your gym's doing well, and I'm a guy that will do whatever it takes to win. So I had to like really just come up with innovative ways to manage my gym. So I'm working like crazy hours, and these guys have no clue. Like I'm like doing accounting, I'm doing business, I'm making like I'm recording myself, giving pep talks and stuff, and then all this time too, I'm actually writing my book. So I'm writing from A to Z about my entire life, about my ups and downs, and how I turned it around. So I met this one coach. His name's Sam Petito, and Sam is an awesome guy, great coach and that stuff. And Sam talked to me early on. It was my first week there. He's like, "Hey Jay, would you help us time the 5 stars and that stuff?" And since I had invented timers, so I have a patent on reaction timers, was like, "Well, you know about the tech. Would you help us to make sure the stuff doesn't misfire?" So I'm like, "Sure." So we started to talk about our backgrounds and his good friend Kurt Hester, right? I'm sure you all know of Kurt Hester, or may have heard of Kurt, was the head strength coach at La Tech. And like Kurt and I are like good friends, and he's like the man. So if you ever reach out to anybody, reach out to Kurt. So I contacted Kurt while at Bama, and I said, "Hey, I would like to talk shop and just kind of just put a name to a face." And he got back to me, and then we started to talk a bit. And then he had a job open up. It was right after the new year. So I'd gotten home for a few weeks and that stuff to kind of like just be back with my wife and kids. And I saw the opening. So I contacted Kurt, and it just so happened he hired me then. So it's just kind of how everything like unfolds. But when your back's against the wall and you get thrown into that fire, I think that's the best environment to be in. I just talked to my classes about this, and the obstacle is the way. So, the obstacle is the way. A lot of times people try to avoid it, right? So I'm like, Marcus Aurelius, man, Stoics, right?
Yeah.
When people look at things like, nah, I'm not sure. It's like, no, no, no. You're where you need to be. This is exactly where you need to be. Go towards it, right? And then once you get there, don't turn back, break through.
Right. Because they always, I mean, no, another good analogy is also always talking about the buffalo. Right. The buffalo never runs away from the storm. They go straight into it and they sit and then they wait and they let it pass and then they keep on moving forward. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So that's it.
right, man. Yeah, that there always gets me like fired up. And I'm 48 now, and I feel the best in my entire life, man. And a lot of times, guys are talking about their knees, their back, for playing football. My elbow's broken down. Like, nah, man, forget that. I mean, like every day you should be at your absolute peak because you're at the furthest point of your life, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is the peak, right? When you get up to the top of the mountain, right? You're not like, wow, I'm older, I'm at the top. Nah, man, this is the peak right now, bro. Right? That's folks. And so every day is your peak, man. And then as soon as you drop dead, that hey, right, that's the bad day.
That's the bottom of
That's
it.
decline, man. You're done. That
So, where do you see this field going? Like in the strength and conditioning field in 5 years, where do you see it being at? And what do you think you'll look back and be like, man, why was I doing that 5 years ago?
yeah, so I don't think that as far as training, I think training is very simple. All right. And my good friend Jeff Dillman, Jeff was the head strength coach for the Gamecocks. He always talks about simple better. All right. So I think that the pillars remain the same, right? You got to be a great coach. Simple skills pay bills. So you got to be able to teach people how to work out, how to train. As far as the differences and things that I would look back and change, I think that's where the sports science comes in. I think sports science is where it's at. So if you're a younger coach, I would get as well versed as possible in analytics. If you can get into predictive modeling, if you can get into Python coding and just looking at trends and identifying weaknesses and being able to quantify those things, you can really take your training to an other level, man. And I do a lot of really cool stuff with my own kids and my clients, and I learned a lot from Eric to you. But I mean, if anything, look at Eric Renahan from Miami. I mean, he is the man, one of the smartest dudes I've ever met. It's just like he is amazing. I mean, this guy is like Albert Einstein of sports science. And he's got a passion for it, and he's always investigating new ways to get athletes the edge. And he's really into the predictive end of things. So, what are athletes doing right now? How's it impacting their bodies? And then from there, how's it impacting what they're doing on the field or track? And just listening to him, working with him, and just being a sponge and observing him. I mean, the detail just helped me unbelievably. And I just take like a fraction because the guy's so smart. If I'm able to just like pick and choose a few things and just kind of learn from him and kind of try to expand it from my own experiences, like I feel like that's a really good day and a good week or month. And I'm able to do some things that I think a lot of folks don't do from a private sector now. But whenever I get back down to the U and that stuff and I get a chance to talk to him, it's always like, man, like, what are you doing now? So I think sports science is that area that's going to be like massive.
I feel like I just learned a lot, just taking bits and pieces from what you're talking about, even from the investing side to just everyday life to how you speak about being at the peak at 48. You know what I mean? Like we say, hey, like you reach your peak age, you reach peak performance by a certain age and all this other stuff. But now hearing like from somebody that's been in the game and played sports and had injuries and all this stuff and like, oh, bro, like 48, like I'm still going, you know what I mean? Like I'm still getting somewhere.
Hey, you ask a guy who's 78, who's young, they'll say, "Man, you're 48. You're a young man, right?"
Right.
They'll. I'm looking at you. And you're a young man, right? So it's like there's zero excuses, and ultimately, anything. Well, the one thing that people can take from this talk is always continue to grow. Always find a way to grow. And I personally, I always look for one thing every year to pinpoint and say, you know what, how can I grow in a physical standpoint? How can I grow mentally? How can I grow spiritually? How can I grow from a family standpoint? What types of things am I modeling for my own kids, right? When I teach, if I'm going to talk to my classes about certain things, like what exactly am I doing, right? That they can copy and put into their toolbox because ultimately no one can become great standing still, right? No one becomes great standing alone, right? So greatness comes from everywhere, like everywhere. So you got to get yourself around stronger, smarter, better folks that can help you. But whenever you're with them, you just got to pour out because the more you can give, you'll get back tenfold. And forget about always getting paid, right? I know that's hard when people are younger. Now it's been a tough time. It's been a tough stretch. And, maybe some folks are, having a rough patch. But again, the more you pour out, eventually it's going to come back to you tenfold.
Coach, you close it out right there. You know what I mean? I appreciate you so much, Coach, for jumping on today. I know we've been back and forth trying to figure out a way to get on. And I was so excited to do this because I knew it was going to be some gems like you just dropped today. So,
Well,
Coach,
thank
thank you so much for your time today, and I can't wait to drop this. this one. Of course.